picture
Don't we all?
20 feet tall above us.
We do. We really do.
So much.
Thank you for having me. It's such a joy. You're one of my all-time favorite people, and anytime you call, I come.
This is going to be a love fest for the next hour and a half. We're going to just compliment each other. But, what I was thinking might be good, and would you agree to? Because I'm guessing not everyone has read the book yet, but I'm guessing soon they all will have.
Yeah.
What if we start with reading a little bit from it? So give us some context and then we launch in. Would that be a good place to start?
We'll start
I'm
there.
going to turn it to you.
I will, so first off, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. I was here a while back, and the faculty and the people and the students are just so terrific, and so I was delighted Kevin asked me to come. But this is the first time I have put a suit on in 20 months, so I just want to say it still fits, which I doubt, but felt good. So I'll just say a thing about the book. I'm going to read a very tiny little piece of the intro, all sort of chopped up because I'm not here last time reading. But a couple things to note about the book is that I wrote the book in present tense, which in the literary world is quite controversial. And in fact, when a piece of it was published in the New York Times Magazine, they said that they only publish in past tense. And I was like, well, then you can't publish a part of the book because it was intentionally written as I was transitioning, had I written it now, it would not be this book, and I wanted very much to write something that was authentic to the moment and the emotions of the moment. So I'm just going to, like I said, I'm going to read a few pages just to give you a little flavor, and then I'm sure Kevin will ask me questions that I don't know the answers to. So this is chapter 1. It's called Finally Me. In New York, New York. When, and this is a quote from Judith Butler, when bodies gather as they do to express their indignation and to enact their plural existence in public space, they are also making broader demands. They are demanding to be recognized, to be valued. They are exercising a right to appear, to exercise freedom, and they are demanding a livable life. I have been living as a white Midwestern woman for 50 years and 10 months, until one weekend in March, I cross a line. It comes unexpectedly on this particular day, but I've been thinking and expecting it for as long as I can remember. The Hotel Chandler in Midtown Manhattan, 7 months on testosterone. I check in at about 6 p.m. Good evening, sir, how are you? This isn't my first, sir. They have come and gone my entire life, and more often in recent weeks. But it's the start of something that from this third forward will be my new life. On March 16, 2017, I become a man. What changed from yesterday and the day before yesterday? What is this fine line of gender that makes me a woman one day and a man the next? Did my jawline get just square enough, my voice deep enough? Did my hairline recede enough? All I know is that from March 16 forward, I am finally me. I take a selfie and send it to my wife with a text message. I'm me now. I can't fucking believe it. I am finally me. I am visible for the first time just 2 months shy of my 51st birthday. This rite of passage, this moment of being welcomed into the world as embodied, is something most people experience at the moment of birth or even earlier, at the moment of those ultrasound pictures of unborn babies that all of my friends with children have, already sexed by their obstetrician and their parents. Some of us are never announced into the world, and some of us wait 50 years. I'm finally announced into being in this moment in a random hotel in Manhattan, unraveling my past, present, and possible future. There are so many political ramifications of this new body, ramifications I both know and can't know until I begin to live them. The next morning I will go down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Good morning, sir. What can I get you? Coffee, sir? I will read the news on my phone. A white supremacist is being asked to resign from the White House. It's the lead story. Second up, another judge has granted a temporary restraining order on the president's newly revised travel ban from 7 countries to 6. This judge also thinks it's discriminatory, even with Iran dropped from the list. My waiter's from India. I learned after he brings me my oatmeal, he tells me he and his wife recently immigrated here, just in time. I think to myself, they both work at the restaurant. He forgets to bring me my orange juice. I will get free breakfast for the rest of the week with many apologies to this newly minted white man. When I ask for more coffee, he calls me boss, a term I will hear often from now on from men of color in service positions, valets, waiters, taxi drivers. I'm stunned and embarrassed by the term, the sudden privilege and power that emanates from my white male skin. I don't feel it in my body yet, but the world can see it. I come into being as a white man in 2017. White male supremacists occupy the White House, immigrants are deported and denied entry into the United States, black lives don't matter to the politicians controlling Congress. I'm announced to the world as a man 8 months before #MeToo will fill our social media and news feeds. Women will unsilence themselves and begin the arduous process of dismantling the lives of individual men one by one for unspeakable acts of discrimination, harassment, assault, and abuse. No part of this 2-year stretch has been more divisive than the Republican Party's insistence on appointing Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. No moment has been more despairing than listening to Susan Collins, a woman, a senator, say that Christine Blasey Ford was likely assaulted, but it wasn't by Kavanaugh. To hear one woman say to another woman that she doesn't believe her, among a chorus of white men who decry what has been done to Kavanaugh, that he is the victim, not Blasey Ford. Depending on who sees me and in what context, my body is grouped with these men and Collins in this moment in history. A threat not just to women, but also to a fragile democracy on the brink of collapse, in part over a gender divide that has never been more volatile. This book is a layperson's anthropological exploration of living a double life. Double consciousness, to borrow a term from W.E.B. Du Bois, is a permanent condition of a trans person who has lived a life in one body and then another. The nuances of doubling require an untangling of two bodies, two distinct perspectives, two lives lived. I seek to do justice to the complexity of this emotional travel as I write this book in a number of different cities and through an evolving bodily transubstantiation, where in one moment I am material subject matter to be consumed, and in another I feel like a holy essence, my body and blood both sacrificed and blessed into being. For most of my life, this process of becoming feels lethal, the disparate parts always at war with one another. I am born to the name Polly, but I never feel like her. I spend decades trying to know her, shape her into something that I can bear to live with. I dress her like I imagine Carl would look if he were allowed to live. The moment at the Hotel Chandler when I am lifting my hands over my head and jumping up and down and taking photos and posting them everywhere is the beginning of revelations, the ones I will try to convey in these pages. I become solid enough to share with you how my becoming is filled with contradictions and questions. And sometimes I have the courage to look back and tell you about what Polly went through, and other times I want to convince you I was always only Carl. This is a book about changing a name, a life, and a gender, crossing a seemingly indistinguishable line, and all the implications of that crossing. For me, my family, my friends, in an American political landscape that misunderstands transgender bodies as some progress is being made toward accepting that we exist. We are human, and we deserve a livable life. I lived half a century first as a girl and then as a queer woman, and now for almost 2 years as a man. What does it mean for a body to transform? Do those changes transform an inner life, a person and his personality? Am I 52 years old, or have I just been born? What do you see? What do I feel? What do I know about America's fraught relationship with gender, having inhabited these two bodies? Is there a revolution lurking in my double consciousness? In transgender bodies that might reinvent discussions of gender? Can other white trans men bring something new to the conversation about white masculinity? In the words of Christine Blasey Ford, an American hero, my purpose in coming forward is to be helpful.
There's so many questions I have that I want to jump off on, but maybe come to sort of the basics, which is the title of the book. And one thing, as you were reading, and we've talked about before, you talked about maybe the book becoming a white man as an original sort of title, and moved off of that. But obviously, this is a story about gender, but also race. Could you talk a little bit about white masculinity and what that means and why it's so central to the book?
Always the title was Becoming a White Man until we sort of got down to actually making a cover for the book. And the reason for that, of course, was because becoming a black man is not anything like becoming a white man. They have absolutely nothing in common. And to call it just becoming a man felt like I was universalizing something that is not, remotely universal, and I wanted to own the whiteness piece of it. But the publishers, and I do believe they were right, were worried that it would be thought of or seen on a shelf as a kind of an ode to white supremacy in some way, which was such an odd thought that I had never even imagined happening. So we actually made the cover in a way where it's becoming and then there's a little blank, and then it's becoming a man. So that was the impetus for the change in the title.
One of the students in class today asked a question that was really simple and yet sort of cut to something in the way you answered it. So I'm going to just regurgitate that question, which is, living with this identity for 50 years, what is the impetus? Why now? Why this story for writing this book and this memoir?
I mean, I wasn't really planning to write a memoir, I will say, but a number of years ago I started an online journal in the theater called HowlRound, and I started it in 2011 expressly to generate more conversation and more voices because the theater, the immensity of the work being done in the theater was not being seen. It was only kind of what was happening at Broadway and in big regional theaters. And so I wrote an essay, I don't know, was it 2016 or something? It's somewhere in there before the memoir. I wrote an essay called A Boy in a Man's Theater. And I talked in the essay about feeling like a perpetual boy, that I knew I was never a woman or a girl, but I could not cross over to manhood, and that the kind of patriarchal world of the theater was not at all available to me, so that I was trapped in a perpetual boyhood. And I wrote a couple of other pieces around that theme, and someone handed them to an agent, and she called me and said, "I'd like to represent you, would you write your memoir?" So that's how I started. I mean, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So, I wrote it quickly.
I had an order of questions, but now I'm hearing things I want to just jump on. You talk about, so many people in this audience are theater lovers, enthusiasts, actors, directors, etc. And you talk about the patriarchal world of theater. I think it's well now to say Carl's been in the theater for a long time, was an artistic director. You mentioned HowlRound, which is, I think, the most important online journal in theater. Talk a little bit about what you see as the enduring, still patriarchal nature of theater, and why is that? I'm not putting words into your mouth, but why is that damaging, and why do we need to address that?
I mean, what I always say about theater is just reflects the world. It's a microcosm of the things that are happening in the world, right? And so, like academic institutions, like politics, this country's foundation is built on, this idea of white masculinity as the norm and the standard bearer, and also the subject position who has access to power primarily. And so it's in, what I like, it's in the walls, it's in the wood, it's in the concrete, you can't, and so the theater is just a reflection of that, and you can never escape the only way to escape the foundations of a house, if you've ever had a house, is, you have to leave the house, right? And you can't. The foundation is the foundation, And so we're at this moment, and it's interesting, the book, it feels, the book is still, it's like, it's still, we're still in the same moment in many ways. I could feel it coming, and that moment is that we have to figure out what to do with a foundation that is corrupt at its core, and did not begin with seeing people of color as human beings, women as human beings, certainly not trans people as human beings, certainly not African American people as human beings. And so, how do you take a university, for example, and somehow is it? I always think like those tents they put away of termites. Like, how do you put a tent over it? Air it out, right? And so the theater is in this moment of it's not like the individual white men at the theater are bad people. They were just living the lives that was offered to them, right? But now that moment is in question about who gets access. And it's utterly disruptive, right? And so, and I think that theater got here like America got here. You know?
I want to. There's a quote that I put 3 stars next to. That's obviously important to me, and I wanted to read it and see if you might reflect on it a little bit. If we are to survive America's current war over who gets to have a livable life, we must confront and understand masculinity, and we must all seek some version of double consciousness to be inside and outside of our identities that are not our own. And you mentioned that in the bit that you read as well. Could you talk a little bit more about this double consciousness that my reading in the book, that it exists in all of us, and what that looks like, what that feels like, what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different layers in that, in double consciousness and then in that quote. So I think we're all living double consciousness, and you can think about that in simple ways and less simple ways, but we are never who we appear to be, right? We are always, there are always things bubbling beneath the surface that people are not seeing, right? And so that sense that you're in a room and people are seeing me, the person in a suit, talking about my career, but they're not seeing me, the person, being harassed, so you're always kind of living 2 lives, I think, and I think in America now, that double consciousness is very much, revolves around race, gender, queerness. In one moment, I live in southern Rhode Island, and one moment I'm just a guy in southern Rhode Island, and in another moment I'm a trans activist in Boston, right? And so, and I think we all have versions of that in ourselves. And I think that quote about, my I has to somehow be able to incorporate a knowing that your I exists it's controversial in that there's appropriation of saying, I can understand what you feel as a transgender person, but that's not what the quote means. I think what the quote means is that if we don't see this bodily essence connected to the person next to us, if we can't find something that makes us know that my I and your I depend on each other, and I think we see this as the environment crumbles around us, and more hurricanes and more floods and fires, and so if we can't feel that, we won't make it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is. I believe that profoundly, and I think of that as a big purpose of writing the book was to think about how do we inhabit ourselves in relationship to others.
You write a lot in the book, obviously it's from an American standpoint, because you are, but you use the political parties, you write about the Kavanaugh thing and about Trump and others. Is there something, how do I put this? Is there something uniquely American in the way that you vision the way we vision masculinity, or do you think there's something universal that has to be worked out?
As I was saying to a class this morning, and I say this all the time, I think 2 things are true at the same time. I think there is some universal things about masculinity. I think American masculinity is very particular because the American political foundation is so rooted in individualism and notions of freedom that are not about freedom of other, but only freedom of self. And I think that's quite unique to America, and so I write what I know, which is that. It's why universal health care is controversial, whereas in many countries it's not at all controversial. It's expected, and so I think that version of individualism, that sense that I am only responsible for me, and maybe my children, my spouse, and my extended family. It runs very strong in this culture, and so where is the part of American history and identity that says, and there are parts of it, certainly the Great Society, there are a number of moments where we have come together to say we are connected, but those moments I think are fewer and fewer, and those moments where that times of deep racism and misogyny as well. So, but that's I think that's very American.
Yeah. I want to step back and just sort of look more sort of 36,000 foot view, not only trans issues in America, but actually just with the book. Could you actually say, for those who haven't read it yet, what are they getting into? What is this? It's a story about you. It's a story about a transition. It says that in the title. But what I find so interesting about it, you talked about the way you've written it, but there's theory. There's chapters that are about travel to Italy and hiking with your friend. What is the structure of the book? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, depending on who you are and either the structure of the book is utterly genius or completely stupid. So this was one of those things. There's nothing in between, as I've learned. But the structure was meant. The structure is not linear. I think often memoirs, the anticipation is there'll be some kind of chronology that is clear. Some people, I think in critique of the book, I don't read any reviews or anything, but I can't remember something, but like, is it essays or is it really a memoir? And it's really a memoir, and it reflects in my mind the way in which the world actually works, which is not in chronology, right? Our memories are not chronological, right? What our bodies feel in any given moment is not determined by time, right? Of day and date, right? It's determined by context and place and who's sitting next to us. It's funny because I have a story in the book about driving down. My mother has Alzheimer's now. Story about this hilarious moment of my mother and I driving down up and down Pikes Peak in a snowstorm when I moved to LA for my first job out of college, and she kept saying to me, I've heard when you go downhill, don't tap the brakes. And I said, if I don't tap the brakes, we're going over the side of this mountain. And it's just and we laughed. And it's one of those moments where you laugh and cry for half an hour. And so I've been here and I keep looking at Pikes Peak and I am laughing and I miss my mom. The person that I would say, oh my God, here I am. I can't. She won't remember that, but and so that's not chronological, right? But it says that moment is as real to me standing outside this morning as it was the day that it happened. And so I wrote the book very much in that mode, right? So what is past could be present, and what is present could be past, and it moves. It is like a kind of a travel log in a way, because I think of life as a kind of it's unexpected travel, right? It's just a kind of like, oh, here I'm here now, And I have a lot of senior theater majors I'm teaching right now, and I keep telling them, life doesn't go like this. There's no progress narrative, and yet you have to trick yourself that there's some kind of thing you're shooting for, so that you get up and, out of bed in the morning, But I think the book is, the book is how I think, which it is, like I said, either cool or terrifying. I don't know. It's what something. So
I think it's cool. And it is a travel. You're in Pikes Peak, and then you're in the Dolomites.
Yeah,
it's fabulous. Talk a little bit about, if you would, Carl, moving this book into a play script. You're in the midst of that process. What have the challenges been, and where is it? When can we see it?
Yeah, I'd like to know. I knew immediately I was going to turn the book into a play, and so I went to a director, a friend of mine, Diane Paulus, that runs American Repertory Theater, and I gave her a PDF because it was published. I said, "Want to make this into a play with me?" And I'm only half serious when I say those things. I don't really expect that everybody's going to say yes. And she read it on her phone on a plane to Japan and wrote me and said, let's commission it and do it. And so probably the easiest thing I've ever done is adapt the book into a play. It was, that process, it's quite interesting because, it starts off as like a monologue because you just are like writing like the memoir, and it sounds too much like the book, and then you sit back and you go, what parts of the book are already activated? Where is their action already? And so we kind of pulled out those parts, and so the play is not at all like the book. It starts in a different place, it ends in a different place. It has new scenes written in it. It seemed like in the play that my wife and I only fought, and we actually did have really lovely moments for like 14 or 15 years before I started transitioning. And so, so I wrote backstory scenes that were not in the book. And the play was, we had done a reading of it. The ART had signed off to produce it. We were excited about it. We sent it to the Public Theater in New York, and Oscar Eustace called me and said, I want to produce it as well. So we were set up to, we were starting the casting process and for a workshop to get it up for probably what would have been this season. And then, COVID came about 3 days after we started casting. And so there was no talk of the play, not even something I brought up because, there was just, it wasn't relevant. And so we just started talking about it again in the spring, and ART is, we were going to start back at it in January and produce it 22-23, so I don't know which part of 22-23. Barring, earthquakes, floods, whatever, I'm not like sitting on the edge of my seat waiting. Yeah.
What is I can't imagine this play, watching a play about me. What is the challenge? Putting something like that.
It was really funny.
I don't know if I can't imagine.
Oh yeah.
I kind of like that idea, actually.
Yeah. And then we play kind of. Yeah, that's what I want to know. No, I mean, it's very funny because right after Diane commissioned it, I went to see a play in the big theater at ART, and it just occurred to me, like, I'm in the theater for 30 years, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to sit here and watch other people watch me being performed on stage. I'm not doing that. I mean, it was like a moment of like, I could never do that. And so I got a map and found that Perth, Australia is the furthest point from Boston and so I thought, well, opening night, my wife and I would be in Perth, and the play will happen, and people can tell me about it. But in terms of working on it, I really don't know if I'll watch it opening night. But in terms of working on it, I have even in the way of writing it, it's very emotional. But I bring, it's like a double consciousness. I just bring my professional self to that, and I think of it as a play, and I kind of detach and work on it that way, and then I might go home and cry later, but not on Monday.
Well, who's the ideal actor to play Carl?
I mean, I had a suggested Brad Pitt myself, but there's, I mean, just, right, so, I mean, it seemed a perfect match, but but yeah, I mean, this is, of course, a huge, enormous question, and we are, I don't know who's gonna play me, because, there are trans actors coming into the world, many of them are quite young, and still, and so a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old played me in the reading, and I did like that, but it didn't seem quite, it didn't seem quite right. So I don't really know.
Okay,
so we'll figure it out. Yeah.
Well, you brought it up, so I want to sort of go there a little bit. Since we're talking about theater and your book and your play, but broadly, Carl and I met 6 or 7 years ago. You were dramaturging on a play at the Public Theater called, I always forget the name, Southern Comfort, about a trans community in the South. And there was some controversy at that time about the casting because it was cast with cisgendered performers. Have we moved, have we progressed in representation of trans people on stage since we met 6-7 years ago? Or where are we?
I mean, the sad part is, really, you and I have talked about this, but it's trying to think of a play that centers a trans man that isn't a one-man trans show done in a cabaret on a budget of $100. I cannot think of that play. The play that I'm writing has 7 characters, and we're gonna, actually cast it and pay for it. That's kind of unheard of. trans women have had just an ounce more success in the world of, the entertainment business, as we call it, but that has come at the cost of, they're more often murdered for their visibility, and so in the 7 years, really, I think there's been almost no advancement of trans narratives. There has been an advancement of people coming into the profession and being trained, trans people coming into the profession and being trained as actors and designers and directors, and so I'm starting to meet some of those folks in their 20s who are going to create a different theater and a different landscape, but the almost total erasure of trans men in this culture. I mean, when Elliot Page came out, it was that would be the biggest moment in trans masculine history. I mean, hands down, that he was on the cover of Time magazine, he is. We've talked a little bit. He loves the book, and he talked about the book in Time magazine, which was really lovely, and I think has interest in he's. I don't know. He's 35, I think. So so a little young, but he's cute. So but anyway, yeah. So it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see how Elliot's career progresses in that transition and what will happen. And but I think it's it's like one of those historical moments of visibility that hadn't really happened before. So
that's a striking comment. I mean, and I assume many of you know Elliot Page, but many of you may not. I mean, Elliot Page is an important American actor, but that's the biggest example of a trans man sort of.
Yeah, I mean,
I can think of a load of trans women who have. So why you said there's a small difference, but why is that?
Well, I mean, I think there are some reasons for it, and one is that I think women are more objectified in the culture, and I think when women enter a space that there is more likelihood of attention, and I think that is a very gendered kind of reality in terms of being, in that sort of old theoretical term, the object of the gaze, right? I think trans women elicit that in a way that is, more likely to be seen, right? So there's, you have a Janet Mock and a Laverne Cox and, several other women now who are, have some visibility. And I just think, I also think that for most trans men, we have spent our entire lives doing everything imaginable to be invisible at a bodily sense, right? And so that is, that I just, it's funny that so many trans men, and again, I think this is changing, but are the most introverted, most, it's just a very, so I think it's, it's not a theatrical subject position in a weird way. I mean, it doesn't make it not a good story. It's just, I think our bodies are, we're doing everything not to perform. And of course, for trans women, there was always drag culture, and there's been a lot of crossover of, trans and drag. There's that, and so there's always been like a performativity to that, or at least a possibility of performativity.
I'm going to just a wee bit of stage management, and then I'm going to launch into a couple other questions. But just so there's no pauses here, Lawrence, one of my students back there, raise your hand, Lawrence, has a microphone. And if you have a question for Carl or a comment, you want to just say something, raise your hand. Can we do the house lights a little bit, Chris? Would that be all right? There's a question down here, and Lawrence will come around. I'm going to ask just two more questions, and then open it up to everyone. Now I got to remember my question.
We're both wearing purple shoelaces.
Oh, right!
Yes.
Okay, I know that story.
Yeah.
I put these purple shoelaces on when Paula Vogel was doing a talk, and I couldn't think of a question, and so I looked at my purple shoelaces and said, "So, Paula, what do you think of my purple shoelaces?" And I was telling Carl this, and then looked down, and Carl is wearing purple shoelaces today. So I guess I from a cis white gay man's perspective, and I'm saying that because I'm certain it's limited in a way in this question. It seems to me that there has been a lot more trans visibility in the United States in the last 5 to 10 years. Do you perceive that as being true as well? And if so, why is the theater having so much trouble keeping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is more visibility, but I think it's complex, right? And so I think entertainment in general. I mean, I don't think film has done much better of a job. I think probably the world of publishing is the place where you can find the most representation of trans people in general, and certainly trans men. And I think the lack of being able to keep up has in part to do with the obsession that the country has over trans bodies and the desire to make sure that we do not exist. And so there's so much energy for trans people of just surviving, just trying to get health care, just trying to, you're hardly thinking about your visibility. You're literally thinking about, you think about, if I go and get, acupuncture, will I be safe? Or, there's nothing you do that is just like a kind of like a normal thing that, when your body's involved. And so, this year alone, there have been 113 bills proposed to make sure that young trans people do not get the care that they need. And so that energy is so pervasive, and I think that a lot of our work is about that. It's about living. And so I think when you say there's more trans, you might be right, but I think some of that visibility is so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I think about more of that sometimes, and then sometimes I think of the positive pieces of that. But I think the theater's behind because the theater is behind in everything, right? In terms of the theater, I think because it takes so long to make a play, it's a slow-moving industry. You make a musical, it takes 10 years, right? So if we were going to start a trans musical today, we would not see that trans musical until 2030, right? So that is part of why. So I think there's a lot of plays right now. I'm sure there are a lot of trans plays out there right now that we're going to see them, but when are we going to see them? I don't know. So I think the theater just moves at that pace.
I know there are questions out there. Did you get a microphone? Lawrence, I think there's a question here, and then raise your hand if you have questions, so Lawrence will find you. Well, there's two right here, so that's
side by side.
Hi, my name is Rina. I'm a student here. I use they pronouns. There has been a TikTok going around that said in the past year during COVID, suddenly a ton of people are coming out as trans or non-binary because when we are away from others who name us, we find ourselves. I'm not finding myself as a doctor doing now. And I wanted this kind of weird to talk about bodies, and if we philosophy teaches a trans woman, she says, am I a woman because someone named me a woman, or am I a woman because I am a woman? Right? And oftentimes in theater, our bodies are everything. So they are used, they're exploited, or whatever. And in theater, a space where your body is literally everything. How do trans actors in general navigate a space where I'm going to be cast a woman no matter what?
Yeah.
Right? It does not matter if I say I'm not one.
Yes, yeah.
Dressing room, government dressing room, we have casting call, those things happen, right?
Yeah.
And we are made something, and so how to navigate this weird middle ground of I'm existing in myself, but also people are giving me this thing, and I'm also existing in that area as well.
I think I'm going to repeat the question for the audience and then tell me how wrong I've gotten it. With the mask, I got most of it, I think. But so you're talking about during COVID, a lot of people, because we were with ourselves for so much, came out as trans and non-binary in that space, and that you identify that way as an actor, but that you would always be cast as a person, but as an actor, you'd always be cast in a female part, right? Because it's, we're talking about what a body looks like, right? And so there's this middle ground of, hence non-binary, right? It's not on one side or the other. How do we navigate that middle ground in a profession that doesn't know how to navigate, but certainly in a culture that doesn't know how to navigate it. And you know, I really, it's a great question, and I don't know the answer. In that you know, I mean, I know one piece of the answer. The world we know is obsessed with what you see right here, right? And so the question becomes, how do we engage each other differently so that we see more than this right here, right? So one of the things I talk a lot about now as a professor in a college is, you know, I used to be so obsessed with, like, you know, getting through the syllabus and now, you know, I'm looking at my students, and, you know, even pre-COVID, but certainly COVID has magnified this, which is like, I want every student in my class to feel seen as they see themselves. And that is, to me, the most important part of what I can teach, is that they exist and have a voice and a body and a self that is much more than this thing that walks into the room that I don't know on that first day, right? That takes a tremendous amount of time, right? And people always say to me, you know, how do you take all that time? And one is I have a light teaching load, actually, which is one of the ways I do it. I mean, I don't teach as many classes as a lot of people do, and so I take all of that time to get to know the students. But that's the work of living right now. I mean, we are ripping each other to pieces in these little sound bites, and I'm not trying to sound like an anti-tech Luddite here, but we will never solve this problem in virtual space. I guarantee you it will never be solved there. We will have to sit body to body and be able to feel each other in all of the complexity, and that is, I think that's the only chance we have, right? And that takes time, and America doesn't have any time. You know, so my students are always like, time. I'm like, I don't work on that. You work on that schedule. You work on that schedule. My time is about you, and however long that takes is how long it's going to take. And if we get 2/3 of the syllabus done, that's all we get done. Because that's not my clock anymore, right? My clock is, I need to see you, to know you, so that you can feel alive and I can feel alive. And then whatever we learn in there will be profound, right? I think the plays will be better. I think the theory will be more interesting. My students read everything because I don't care if they do or not, right? Because that's not my focus, right? And so that's a long. You're getting me on my like, you know. God damn it! Let's stop this, you know, nonsense of thinking people are this thing, you know. So I hope that for you, that you get to be you. You know, I have a student who's non-binary who presents as male and was wanting to play Ultimate Frisbee, and you have to have a number of men and a number, you know, and he's like, they are like, sorry, but he was using he at that time. He's like, well, am I he now or am I they? And he came to me, you know, and he sent me voice memos and he wanted to know what I thought, and I'm like, you know, I mean, I think it's what feels right to you in the moment. And it's not always the answer you'd think, which is to be they. It might not be in that moment, right? Like, it's what they want to do, right? It's what they want to do, how they want to live, and how they want to be seen. And I said, if you feel erased, then you have to be you. If you don't feel erased, if you feel that you live in these two worlds, then embrace that, right? I mean, I embrace two worlds, and I live with that. So, but I hope for them and for you that you get to the full experience of being seen on stage and everywhere else.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay, so my name is Grace. I'm also a student at UCCS, and time is actually a really good segue into my question. I know that this process, this experience is highly individualistic. But would you say that there's a certain age, you were talking about being born and how that happened for you 50 years after most people were born. Would you say there's a certain age where a person realizes that they haven't truly been born, thinking about young minds as being impressionable and influential in the different places and environments that people are raised? Do you think that there's a certain age where they're capable of determining that for themselves?
I mean, you know, you ask me very hard questions. It's a really great question. I think there's a lot of question about this because there's this thing of like, what do we do with a 4-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, or like when does someone know a thing about themselves? And I talk about this in the book. I'll just tell an example, and then I'll use the story as the kind of the answer, which is my wife has a cousin who has a child, born literally since the moment of leaving the womb, he has been interested in princesses, glitter, sewing. There isn't a masculine cliche that, everything that is, and you're like, that's not culture, right? That is who that person is. What he will become, I do not know, right? Will he be a gay man? Will he be a straight man who likes to sew and wear princess costumes? I have no idea, right? And so parents where I've been, I think partly the answer is just taking people at who they are, where they are, when they are. And then I think in terms of this question of knowing, I knew my entire life. It was never an option, so it's not like I knew to think about it, but I am certain had I ever felt I could have inhabited me, I would have much sooner in the game, and only because that's all I was trying to do ever was to be a boy and a man. I never had another project, that I was. That is the thing I was thinking about. No, so I also think we have to trust that young people know a lot about their bodies and what they feel like, and I trust young people to tell us, and I think we have to listen and make the best decisions we can when we listen. And I don't think there's a right decision, but I think I just love my this young kid's mother and father because they just all the space that this young person needs to be themselves.
Other questions? See, there's one back there. And while you're running back there, I want to make sure that sometimes we throw around words that I don't think necessarily everyone knows. So could you? The common question is, what is cis? Could you say what cisgender means? Because I don't think everyone knows that.
This is just simply you were born and gendered, and you still identify as what you were gendered when you were born.
Great, yeah.
So in the first question, we talked about your distaste for virtual environment and the need to meet persons face to face. And I was wondering how you counter that with the voices that virtual spaces have given people. You no longer need to go through a publisher, a traditional publisher, to publish a book. You can publish a blog, you can do a Kindle ebook type thing. YouTube is a whole space for actors, and so you clearly have a lot of problems. At least that's why I felt out of your first question. And so I was curious how you square with all the benefits that virtual spaces have given people to be themselves and promote themselves without all the barriers that would go back to, I think, the white masculinity, the patriarchal that we had talked about a lot in your book.
Yeah, let me clarify. I think if it came out that way, as I say, two things can be true at the same time. I think there are a lot of democratizing impulses to the virtual world that I think have been very positive. That's why I created an online theater journal for exactly that reason. There were virtual theater projects that happened during COVID that people saw that would have never seen them. These are good things, right? So I don't think the answer is either or, but I do believe that the larger notion of this idea that we're one thing. Part of what social media does is it reduces complexity and nuance often, not always. Sometimes democratizing something enhances that, but often if it's only 280 characters, you're not going to be able to get very far with the nuance of an identity. And so what's happening now is people believe they are one thing because that one thing is the thing that is how they are seen in a social media avatar platform, you know. And so all I'm suggesting is that it's going to take a lot of other kinds of work to overcome this reduction of the human self to that emotion. And I don't think it will all happen virtually, which isn't to say the virtual world can't be a healthy add to it, but also, you know, I mean, I'm in the world of students who are on, TikTok 24/7, and there's some upsides to their creativity that comes from that. I think it's really good, and there's also a sense of the world being, you know, this big that comes from that. And so I just think it's always about holding two truths side by side and figuring out how to balance those things. So yeah, but I think your points are exactly right. Those are all the upsides of the virtual world.
Other questions? I think there's a bunch. But way in the back, I think I saw that right.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you for coming. It's been really great to meet you yesterday and also meet you today. I just wanted to ask, who are some of your inspirations or scholars that you would recommend us young artists and the people in the field to look into and expand our knowledge and our visions?
Oh my God, jeez. You should see my house. My library. My house is just a library. It's a great question. I'll give you a few, and then it's going to be so poorly done. I don't know what to say about that because I'll miss so many people. But you know, theater-wise, because I'm right now teaching Twilight by Anna Devere Smith. I think her project on the American character that she did in the 90s is probably the most relevant thing for our moment in time right now. And it's no surprise that Signature Theater has just remounted it, just opened last week. But it's with 5 characters, not one, which is, I think, raises a really interesting question about what bodies actors can inhabit. She has been certainly a theater hero of mine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Would you say just a little bit about Twilight, because I think it's really relevant. I mean, when it came out and what Anna's doing with that work, because that's.
Yeah. I mean, so what Anna Devere Smith did was, and I don't know how she did it in the time that she did it, but after the Rodney King verdict and the term riots, which is a controversial term, but it was used at the time, the LA riots happened. She went out and interviewed just tons of people. The play has, I think, 34 characters in it, because that particular crisis was, so complex. It was, the Korean community and the African American community and the people who were in Hollywood, where these riots were bleeding into their, spa and pool, and so she. What she does is she interviews people and then she plays all the parts and she edits, but she plays the parts verbatim as they were spoke, what was said, and it's such a wonderful example of how complex it is to reduce any situation to one problem, right? These are economic issues. These are city zoning issues. These are, these are interracial tensions. These are immigration questions. And she, I think, captures that in a way. And so, Signature Theater, no surprise that it's timely, because when you read it, you cannot believe that she's not writing it honestly about George Floyd. I mean, it could be, a little bit different because of where it was in LA, but so Signature Theater was actually just about to open it when the pandemic hit. And so she's allowing, and this never, I've not known this to ever happen with her work, but she's allowing 5 actors to play those 34 parts. And I haven't seen it. I will see it. I'm dying to see it. It just opened this week. So
TheaterWorks, by the way, for some of you know, that did the election. I'm blanking on the name, but Anna Devere Smith piece during the election season that some of you probably saw.
Yeah. So other inspirations for me. Dostoevsky. I read the Brothers Karamazov every couple of years because I think if you want to know about the insanity of the human mind, he captures that brilliantly. Certainly the poet Claudia Rankine has had an enormous influence. She has been a collaborator of mine, maybe the most brilliant artist I've ever spent time with. And crosses a lot of genres with her work, which interests me, that she writes in the theater or poetry. She just won a poetry award for her book, Just Us, which is essays, and she accepted the award, and I'm glad you think essays are poems. She's a poet. You could email me and I could just send you a list of a lot of people I read in every genre. Louise Erdrich has had a major influence on me. I Love Medicine is one of the greatest novels I think I've ever read. I actually have a piece published in LitHub. If you go there, it's an online journal, and you can pull up a piece, and it's the 22 books that have had the biggest influence on me. Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns gave me insight about race that made me feel about how could I have a PhD and be this stupid? So there's just a lot, kind of people from all over the map, and I think, as a theater person, it's a mistake to just read theater stuff. I think the world is, the world is what the theater is, and so I've never thought of just like reading plays or but I do love plays too.
Take him up on that email. So.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Celeste. I'm a theater major here at UCCS. I wanted to go back to you said about how you make your students feel seen as who they are, and maybe create that safe space. And I think I just want to know some ways that you kind of open up this space in your classrooms, as a professor, and especially since you have a power and authority over your classroom, and how you keep it a safe space. And also since we just came out of this almost 2 years of heavily isolated online classes where it was really hard to have those connections with people of authority, and how you encourage that in classrooms.
So I can tell you some very specific things that I do. One is I start the class. I start all of my classes the same. 3 things I start with all of my classes. And if you take 2 classes in mine, you have to do it twice. Which is I teach I do these 2 things first, and I do the 3rd thing. But the first thing I do is all of the students put together a version of a collage of who they are. And they get as much time as they want to present who they are to each other. And I don't care if that takes 2 days or 3 days. I have maybe somewhere between 17 and 22 students right now in each class, and we sit and we have a discussion with each other about each person in the class. By the time we finish that, they are already starting. My goal is to get them to be a community amongst themselves, right? Whether I'm, of that is not the most important thing. And then the other thing I have them do is I have them send me a 10-minute voice memo where I just listen to them talk about themselves for 10 minutes. And then I send them a voice memo back and talk and ask them questions and say what I heard and that kind of thing. One day of every semester, everybody just brings in a song, their theme song, whatever, and we just listen to each other's music for a day. And it's not a class about music; it's just what we do. And then I also I always teach a piece. Now this is newer, but from the 1619 project called the Brutality of American Capitalism. And I set the sort of intellectual stage with the foundation upon which their education is based, which is brutality, capitalism, of using your individual body to acquire as much as you can through whatever means you can. And so, so those are some very, very specific things I do.
I think we have time for one more question. So there's one down here. And we will mingle in the lobby and do some book signing. So if you want to get your question out, then you can do as well. Let's do two more because you have your, and I saw your hand up as well. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kira. I'm also a student here at UCCS. So my question is kind of about like labels. I know growing up queer is kind of hard for someone to label themselves, especially if they don't really have that kind of influence around them, that kind of positive influence. So my question is, I guess, because having been involved with people who identify as trans and non-binary, and not really knowing how to navigate how to label myself, because at the risk of invalidating how they see themselves, I'm just wondering if the way that you and your partner, I know you said you grew up, you were presenting as a woman for a while while you two were together. So after your transition or during your transition, did you guys kind of have trouble navigating labels, or was it something that you guys just didn't even really think about?
We thought about it. When you read the book, when I was transitioning, my primary care physician, who's an expert in trans healthcare, Boston is the place to transition if you want to transition somewhere and be cared for well. She said, be prepared that you will lose everything when you transition. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm going to gain everything. And she was actually exactly right. I lost my job in a form, a complicated story, over just incredibly blatant transphobia that I never saw coming from people who I've known for many years. And then I lost many friends because they felt I had betrayed them, that they had become friends with this other person, and that I was not that person. And then the very worst was my marriage. Our marriage survived by whatever is the smallest thing you can get to that's not an inch. And the reason that we almost did not make it, and I'm grateful every day that we did, that we have a better marriage now. But the reason was that I always thought she knew what I knew. And in a way, I was I talk about, when you transition, it's definitely a narcissistic moment in time. You're like, what do I look like now? Am I passing now? Am I not passing now? Like the mirror, and you are joined. I stupidly, it didn't occur to me that she was a gay woman who was not interested in being married to a man. That had not occurred to me. I felt, like it was just going to be the easiest thing. And she was like, I remember we were taking a walk. We have a beautiful cemetery where we used to live in Boston. And she said, you want to be a man? And I was like, what do you think I've been doing? It was literally we had lived on different planets, and so we, it was just the most painful thing imaginable. There's a letter in the book that I write to her, and the book is obviously dedicated to her this and her courage to stay with me, to stay with somebody just being born. I got this beautiful, this 82-year-old couples counselor, and she took us to school and back every week, and I think it is really complicated, and but we, very few marriages survive it, and I feel very lucky that we did.
You had a question here? Yeah.
Hello, my name is AJ, and I use he, him, his pronouns. And my question is central around social constructs and stereotypes. And I was interested in hearing if you have a story that you're willing to share that kind of highlights how these stereotypes swayed or transitioned or aided or even like challenged it, and how it was used to develop your own personal equity, if you will.
My own personal what?
Personal equity?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's, gender is a construct and it's not a construct, right? I mean, it's, I really find that the reduction of gender to a construct to be kind of offensive because, you don't die for something that is a construct. But the cultural repetition of notions of gender obviously make it feel like it's not changeable. This has been a hard thing to talk about. It's a good question. I actually like whatever, for lack of a better term, guy culture, and I like hanging out with just men sometimes. I like not sexist talk with men, but I like to talk about, and it's not that women don't do this because, again, you're stereotyping and crocheting, but, I sit in a lot of bars and it's just men and we talk about bourbon and sports and I like that, and my wife has a lot of women friends and has a whole life of, it's very different, right? We have very different interests. And so I think my understanding of masculinity obviously is very influenced by the masculinity that's in the culture, but it's also influenced by how horribly that masculinity can be weaponized. And so I'm so acutely aware of that I think, my work is, as a man is not to weaponize it, not to use it that way, and to figure out how to keep a conversation about, I teach a course all about white masculinity because we have to learn to talk about it. It's not about whether it's toxic or not toxic. It's about how we landed here and why it looks like it looks, and what we do now. Because we have white parents and white brothers and white children and white friends, and we're going to have to come to terms with that. So I think always, you're again in a parallel life world. You're indulging in the stereotypes, and then you're questioning them at the same time.
Thank you. I just keeping an eye on time and knowing we have books out in the lobby. I just want to wrap up for our stage time here.
Oh my God, we talked for a long time.
Yeah, right? This is good. I want to say, before I thank you officially, I just want to thank you all for coming and making time and getting Prologue back in person. We're going to have another Prologue at the end of November. I'll send all of you multiple emails. Aiko Take, the dancer, is going to come and talk about her new book, The Body in Fukushima. It's phenomenal. So that'll be, I think it's 28th or 29th of November. I'll send an email for sure. So what we're going to do now, we're going to break for on stage. There are books out in the lobby. If we run out of books, the bookstore has a bunch of what they call little book plates, that if you can buy the book, Carl will sign the book plate, and then they'll stick it in, they'll mail you the book. So if we run out of physical copies of the book, don't let that dissuade you. Buy the book, they'll send it to you with Carl's.
My agent says, please buy it. I just want to thank you for the lovely, deep, and beautiful questions and engagement, and sitting with me. It's always, I feel very grateful and honored when people take the time to have these conversations. So thank you.
On behalf of everyone, and they'll join me, I'm sure, in applause. Thank you very much.